Hey, welcome back everyone. Rob here from Ram Studio Comics. So in today's video, I'm going to I'm going to explain to you how to introduce multiple characters in a scene and some of the techniques that I employ to do so, and what I would recommend that you do as well if you struggle in this area of your work. So basically, you could probably tell already that I started with a really crazy looking perspective grid. I did each, it's a 1 point perspective. That would be this red blob in the middle and then everything coming out. I did each one of the, I don't know if you'd call those perspectives. Just this is a perspective. The rest are vertical and horizontal lines, okay? But I did each one separately. Then I placed a layer over top that I toned back, and I like doing it this way because it gives me some areas of edit if I want to change something. But I basically at this point just really play around with the opacity so that, sometimes I want them more visible if I'm working on something that's a little bit more specific to the perspective. And then as I start to work on characters, I usually tone it back a lot. So that's just how I do it. I also put each character on their own layer, and I usually start with the character in the foreground and I work back. So just some basic preliminary things to cover with you. I also like to do my poses with an ink pen. I just feel like it's quicker and I can get the idea down, and I can always soft erase and draw over top with a pencil, but for some reason I've just been really gravitating towards doing my poses in an ink pen. Obviously digital, it's still kind of like drawing anyways. So let me explain why I think it's so necessary to do this for group shots. The main thing is, if you work off a blank white canvas like this, you're more likely to put characters out of perspective. Now, if it's one character, it's generally not as big of a deal. It still needs to fit in the scene, but when multiple characters are introduced, it's very important. Probably the most important thing I would say is the fact that you really have to keep in mind where your horizon line is. So the horizon line is going to intersect the vanishing point like that. So anything below that, we're going to be looking down at the character. Anything above that, we're going to be looking up at the character. Now, that's not always the case either, because the human body can go in so many different angles and tilt and contort. So it's just kind of a starting point, but ultimately you are looking up at everything above that horizon line. It's above your line of vision, okay, your line of sight. So this is where your eye level is in the scene. So let's just say that we have a character. Let's say that this is not particularly the Flash, but we'll say it's like somebody like the Flash. I like to think about character archetypes, I think, or whatever, certain popular characters as kind of a reference point. It's all been done, right? We've all drawn the Hulk, Superman, Batman. There's just variations of all these popular characters. You have running characters, flying characters, power characters, yada, yada, yada. So let's just say that this is a character that, has the ability to fly, and they're majestic like a Superman, right? So something like that, we might start with, maybe they're just kind of flying up in the air, kind of a bowed out chest. Let's start with that. So we will know, again, that we're looking up at the chest. Now, if somebody's standing in front of us and their chest is really bowed out and their back is arched, you might get this kind of perspective anyways. But since the character's above the horizon line, you're going to at least do this and maybe take it a bit further, right? So what I'm going to do is first start with the torso and just get a basic representation. This doesn't have to be the way that the character ends up, okay? It's just a starting point. I can play around with the size and, angle and things like that, but it gives us that preliminary starting point to figure out, where this character might reside in the scene and, starting the pose. So let's drop down to the pelvis. We tilt that back a bit. So if we've got the center line running to the body, maybe we tilt that back a little more. It shows that arch in the back. Maybe a leg coming up and out like this. Start very primitive with these shapes, because again, this doesn't mean that this is exactly what we're going to land on. We're just trying to make some best case decisions, or we're trying to make some decisions here and figure out if this is going to work. Opening for the arm. This other arm will be on the other side of the chest. We'll bring this leg back, kind of hide it under that top upper leg there. Again, just some primitive shapes to kind of figure this all out. We do want there to be some recession, or not recession. We want things to recede into, we don't want another recession, folks. That's all I'm saying. But we want things to recede into space because, again, we have this perspective going on like this. So again, this is where these lines kind of remind me to make these choices. Remember too, the easiest way to convey foreshortening is to really have the overlaps evident, okay? Especially in comics, you know, this is in real life too, obviously, but in comics, you really want to overdevelop the overlaps. It's kind of like the quickest way with line work to show foreshortening. And then obviously shift in proportions and subtleties and the overlaps. There's all sorts of things that happens. But first off, just really get these overlaps. If it can read decently well in your simplified skeleton, your simplified gesture, like what we're doing here, then chances are you can render over top of it and make it read even better. So I want to kind of chisel off the chest here, get a little bit more of that angle going on. Okay, so probably the trickiest part, well, depending on the pose, like we could just take the character and put their arms back like this. All right, and then the head up here, and it would be real easy to finish out that pose. Now, obviously, the torso is too big to the legs, but I'm not entirely concerned with that. It's easy to adjust that. But now what happens when we start to try to be a little bit more dynamic? We're like, no, we really want this perspective to show, so we're going to bring this arm up. Arm is never straight, so just make sure that if you're going this way with the arm, you don't continue that way, okay? Just put a little bit of a tilt in there. Just it looks more realistic. Same thing with the hand. You can kind of over dramatize this and go back and forth with these tilts. And then all of a sudden the hand can be another, it looks kind of strange, but let me get back to here. It can be another way to shift the angle of that arm. I don't know if I like that, but I'm just going to start with that for now. And then head position can be, you know, kind of centered over the torso. I think it would need to come back a little bit from this angle though. So let's drag that back a little bit like that. Play around with the height of the neck. We're looking up at this character, so the neck is going to appear to be a little bit more shallow. But again, that's that subtlety that you got to be careful of, because you know, give somebody a short neck, it really takes away from their majestic strength, looking imposing strength, unless it's a character that's like all big shoulders and trapezius, and then you know you shorten the neck to make them look like those other muscles are bigger. But again, I was picturing somebody a little bit more like Superman, but I like to say it's not Superman, so I don't have to like worry about people thinking my videos copyrightable or I'm stealing from copyrights. I don't know. Who knows how that works? I see people doing videos on YouTube and there's like all kinds of fan art, and then there's commercials, and then other people, they say you can't monetize that. Anyways, that's my problem, not yours. Sorry. Okay, so something like this. I think that's better. I think that leg looks, it's weird. I shrunk the chest or the torso and the leg looks even smaller to me. Maybe I'm just paying attention to it now. I do kind of cheat on proportions, and forgive me if you're somebody that is drawing along traditionally. Sorry, but that's just the way it is. Like with digital, you know, I know I can adjust these things rather quickly. So I kind of think about other things before the proportions all the time, you know, naturally. But yeah, sorry, because when you get to paper, it is kind of a pain, because I've done the same thing. I get on pen and paper, and I'm like, oh boy, I'm kind of stuck now. I got to redraw this. Okay, so the other arm, let's bring this back. Again, I'm thinking about this perspective, but I want to bring that back and then bring the forearm. Remember that overlap I talked about? There it is. And the fist, we're going to do a really significant overlap. And just like that, we've got a, you know, a representational version of the foreshortened arm and fist or whatever, you know, the overlap of the forearm, the biceps here, deltoid there, bada bing, bada boom, forget about it. Okay, so there we go. So there's a you know, a quick mannequin, okay? It's not perfect, it's kind of a weird pose, but we can play around with it. We could, you know, tilt him. He's flying, so he doesn't have to be, he's not flying forward towards camera, but he's kind of flying up and, you know, putting the one arm out. Maybe the opposite leg should be up. I think, you know, based upon counterpasta, whatever, but that's more running. I don't think that applies to flying, right? Just like if you jump in basketball, you lift up the same arm and leg. So you know what? That probably works. So there we go. That's basically a our next pose. And what I tend to do is just work back. So I work on characters that are more predominant and take up more space in the scene. So like if this was an Avengers shot, I'd hurry up and get Hulk in there because he's going to take up more space unless he's way in the back. And the other thing that I think is helpful for people that struggle with this, and you can see I refined this other pose one more time. So I would take this, soft erase it, refine it, but I want to get a couple of these poses in there, and maybe I'll time lapse some of the refinement or something. But the other thing I want you to practice, if you do this and you're like, I'm just not getting it, Rob, my poses aren't coming out right, I don't see how you're doing this, you got to really think about, I've got other videos on it, but the three main masses of the body: head, torso, pelvis. Okay, and then get good at drawing separate arms and legs and paying attention to the way arms and legs look in different poses. It's not going to come overnight. It's a pain in the arse, or the gluteus maximus, to sound a little bit better. All right, so, but the other thing that you can do is you can practice this, and it's going to sound rudimentary. You're going to think, well, dude, that's not going to help me. It really is. So, like, for instance, just taking the time to do this, even next to the characters you're getting ready to draw, or maybe you draw on some of your background first, it really helps because it gives you this, you're mapping out space. You're starting to think more dimensionally about what's in front of you on the page. It's not a flat page anymore. So sometimes I'll throw stuff like that in there just as a quick reference point to, again, make me think more dimensionally. Now, I've done it long enough where these guides are enough for me. But you might not be there yet. So you might need to practice those basic primitive shapes. And it's not just these. It's, you could, or you should, I should say, you should also practice doing this. So you throw in your box shape, your dimensional, three-dimensional prism, and then you convert that to a cylinder. Okay, and all that is, here, let me show you a better way to do this. And it's going to be real quick because this isn't entirely about drawing backgrounds in perspective, but you do your little cross sections, okay? You find your perspective back here, you do the same thing, all right? And then you draw the circle or oval, I guess, and in that area, still kind of a circle in perspective, and then you connect the lines like this, and then you shade it as such. So, and you practice doing things like that so that you basically are thinking more dimensionally. Now, anatomy poses a whole nother slew of problems because anatomy isn't so easily mapped like what I'm showing you here, but it does relate. It doesn't seem like it relates at first, but the more and more you do it, it will. Okay, so now let's add another character. Let's picture, since this kind of feels like Superman and Flash, we'll throw in what could be like Wonder Woman. Now, I could have her running towards, but it's not Wonder Woman. It's Wonder Lady. How about that for copyright purposes? Wonder Lady. Okay, so she's running towards camera like Flash. We'll do an opposite, or like Speed Guy, and we'll do an opposite shoulder arm thing. So, she's like this. Maybe she's got a shield up here, something like that. Again, this is a very primitive, crude version. Get that torso in there. We have it thinned down. Remember too, it's kind of good to do this with the torso. So, I don't mean like a box, but you do a shape on top of a shape on top of a shape, connect the pelvis. Okay, so primitive shape, that's a bad version, but still, you should figure out your own shorthand for this stuff so that you can work this out, get the characters in place, especially on group shots, because you don't want to sit there and waste all day and then realize that the overall collaboration, the overall, God, I cannot talk today, the overall composition, not collaboration, the overall composition isn't working, okay? So if you throw it in with basic primitive shapes, you got a lot better chance of figuring that out. You could try bringing this leg back. Now here's another problem that I always seem to face with a perspective group shot. It's real easy as I'm thinking about a leg to go like this, okay? And you can see that looks pretty weird, right? What I have to think about is her position within the scene. This is our ground plane. If you were to take the red here with that green, that's the ground plane under her somewhere, okay? So she's leaning forward, so her center of balance is off, but it's still the foot needs to be connected probably not past this point. Okay, and this is a bit of a guesstimation, but I could already tell that I was starting to work out sideways, skewing to the side. Okay, so what I have to be careful of is that makes sense, and if it doesn't, I might need to work down more and land her foot more below her. Now that looks weirder than the first one, but I just want you to think about this. It might be okay to position the foot way back here by the time it's said and done, but sometimes the weirdness that you're getting in the pose is really the foot placement in correspondence to the ground plane. It's why it's also sometimes a good idea, especially for standing characters, to actually think about the foot plane almost immediately. Now, it's easier to do that when they're standing upright because you can find a center of balance through them. But in this case, when they're leaning forward, the center of balance, there is none. I mean, I guess you could place a line through the waist, but you're distributing your weight over that center of balance and you're pushing off. So there's more kinetic energy. I don't know how you would find center of balance on that, but for me, I look at it till they look like they're falling over. If they look like they're falling over, then I might pull it back. But again, they're superheroes. I don't know. I probably just not even worry about that. But the foot placement is important. Now, I feel like that is still off, so let me try again. And I might need to, sometimes I'll take the characters that are in front. You know, like they always say in How to Draw the Marvel Way, stuff like that. You got to get used to drawing through, right? So what I'll do is tone that character back so I can draw through more efficiently. And then I think ultimately I'm just going to have to maybe bring that leg forward. Let me see here. Yeah, let me just get these guys right out of the way. And let's focus on this. So I'm going to get rid of this. Try again. And let's see. Let's just bring this leg forward. Just feel like it makes more sense. So stack those components. Seems to be a weirdness in the body versus the legs. Yep, still not digging that. Hold on. And this is definitely why you want to use primitive shapes to figure this out. Could I start with the legs first? See, I don't think I could. I generally start with the torso first. But let me, yeah, see, I feel like this all works. Like I could get this to work. So that's another big problem when doing this. Like sometimes you just feel like I could save it. I could do this. And sometimes you just need to start over. Let's see. She's running forward. She's angled pretty dramatically. Upper leg forward. This leg back. This leg in perspective would go, you know, like this. Maybe back here. I gotta get that knee in, and then the lower leg. And it just feels like it needs to go way back, like you'd almost not see it. Like I'm bringing it too far over initially. So trajectory is a big thing, right? So you start off and you're putting it into place, and you ultimately end up at the wrong point because you started at the wrong angle. So a big part of foreshortening is that, I would say. Okay, so let's say, let's try bringing that forward again. This leg back, let's just bring this back and just kind of guess at a foot back here. Does that look weird? It looks weird, doesn't it? So weird. And then her hair kind of flowing as it tends to do. As Wonder Lady's hair tends to do. And then we sculpt into the body, get the anatomy in there. God, I feel like I need to draw that back foot, but I don't want to put it in there. I feel like it's gonna look funny. But if not, the leg would be further down. Hey, you're gonna see it. All right, I'm just gonna go for it. Just gotta do it. Just gonna leave that funky representational foot. And let's see if our other character covers it. Ah, so close. See, I might maneuver that, honestly, because I don't want him covering her hip, her thigh as much. That's kind of my favorite part of Wonder Lady. So what I'm gonna do is do a little cheat, and I'm gonna use him to cover her foot. That's pretty bad, isn't it? Well, she's too big anyways. Perspectively, I think she needs to be scaled down a bit. And obviously we got to watch out for weird tangents and things. I think we should tilt her a little more. But yeah, I'm going to totally use him to cover up the part I don't like. It is what it is, folks. Sometimes you got to do that. Okay, so let's see if that makes any sense now. Where's he at? Right there. Yeah, I don't mind that. And again, it's very crude, very representational at this point. Yeah, Superman looks too big too, doesn't he? Or, sorry, Super Dude. Dude Super. You guys are probably getting annoyed with me saying that, right? I'm sorry, I just don't know if it's really an issue. I gotta speak to my lawyer. But he's just so darn expensive. Okay, so just like that, we've got 3 characters, and really this is the process. And I would just keep working back, building back. And also, you know, it's not a bad thing to get more of the scene in place, obviously, because in the same way where, you know, we maneuvered her to take apart something I didn't want to draw, or I couldn't draw correctly at this moment, you know, that's the same thing that's going to happen with elements of the scene. So maybe there's some debris up here from, you know, some of the catastrophes that they're fighting. You know, maybe it doesn't look right because she's running that direction, but she could jump over it, I guess. So, but you might get in some of that stuff. You know, is there a wrecked car back here? You know, so you start off with a box and another box on top of it for the top of the car, and at first it looks like a really old school crude car, but then you keep rounding it and smoothing things around, you know, and you can basically get it to be a car. But yeah, so you might get in more of that stuff so that it feels better as you draw the characters. Everything is going to kind of lend to the next thing. The more information you get in the scene, the more it's going to start, you know, making sense. That it's all going to relate to one another. And then with, you know, characters, I just kind of keep going with that. So let's do one more, and then I will time lapse it and refine some of these poses so that they make a little bit more sense. And so with this next one, let's say this character is, let's say this character is flying as well. Okay, so they're back here flying up to help out. Okay, so we start with the top of a torso, and we start very cube-like. Okay, so there's a very crude upper torso, more like a cube shape, just to get that perspective in place. Sculpt some of that back, round over the top. Just like that. And then, you know, we've got the opening for the neck. We've got a pelvis back here somewhere. And then we'll put a leg going back in perspective. So it's got to be very foreshortened. Obviously, the upper leg is going to be a lot taller or longer from this perspective than the lower leg. The foot's going to be real small back here. We're going to drop the other leg down. And remember, if it's not going back in perspective, it's going to stay the same width going down because there's no perspective shift. So you're just going to draw a regular leg going down, but then as you bring this leg back this way, again, that perspective occurs. This foot's going to be larger than that foot. Let's bring this arm up. Actually, let's just bring them both up. We'll do that. So here's the shoulders. We bring the arms up. You know, they're probably going to cover, this arm's going to cover that face a bit. So we got to be careful with that. We don't want it to totally cover the face, but somewhere in there. And then attach some little hands, little diamonds for hands, whatever. So again, there's another quick pose. It's not pretty, it's not exact, it doesn't need to be. It gets the job done. It gets you a little bit closer so that you can keep pressing forward. And all of a sudden it gives, you know, you got characters, you got motion. Now, you know, I would say this is a scene where you're going to have a lot of background, because me personally, if this wasn't a background intensive scene, or say my background was going to consist of just, you know, information off to the edges, right? Debris and some silhouettes and, you know, stuff like that, whatever it is, okay? If that's the case, I would make the characters a little bit bigger and leave less negative space. If this needs to be a scene where there's like going to be, you know, little villains in the background, you know, soldiers or whatever, then I'm going to leave more of this negative space so that I can get in a bunch of this little, you know, minutia of the storytelling, right? So just keep that in mind. You're going to utilize more or less negative space. I tend to like the ones where the characters are bigger. So now obviously digital, it's pretty easy to do this. And hey, if it's not digital, it's a light table, right? So it's the same thing. You just use your light table and you could do all the things that I'm doing here just with a little bit more blood, sweat, and tears. Just a little more effort. But, you know, I would scale these characters up to eat up the negative space because I typically like, my favorite thing is to, you know, detail characters. So I'd have them fill up the scene more so that I could draw in more detail. That's just my personal preference. And I think it makes for a better feeling, a more dynamic character shot, a more dynamic cover or whatever, because there's not so much gap of, you know, information. So yeah, personally, that's what I think. And then I feel like there's got to be another character over here, or I'd have to change maybe the overall composition just a little bit. So if we take that character and bring them forward a bit more, you know, we could just make him larger, and all of a sudden, you know, larger and lower generally, you know, so he's not going to be larger and way up in the air. I guess he could be, but then he's going to look like he's standing on the other character's back, and that's not what I'm going for, obviously. But I don't think I want him that big because I want his arm in the scene there. But yeah, so you can play around with these, yeah, kind of like that. That way they're not all so aligned in their position so much. So let's try that. Raise his leg back. And see how it's so easy to adjust these because I'm not eliminating a ton of time and information, okay? If these were finished drawings, I'd be a lot more apprehensive to make these adjustments. So this is really it. So what I'll do here is I'm going to time lapse it a bit. I'm just going to refine these a little bit more, at least to the level that I've got the character up front, and see if it kind of reads well and, you know, kind of refine it for you. So with that, let's move on and time lapse this video. All right, so there you have it. And just to kind of recap, just remember that if you struggle with this type of thing, establish your perspective lines first. So something like that. Use a layer over the top if you want to tone back the opacity, or you could just draw out the lines together and then tone back the opacity there if you're working digitally. If not, you're going to use a light table. Start with the foreground elements first, work back. That generally will help you with things like foreshortening. It will help you build into the scene and not waste a tremendous amount of time developing characters in the background that will ultimately get covered up. If this still doesn't work for you, try a variation where you draw your background in more detail. And also another way to think about this, and sometimes often the way that I'll do it, is I'll work from a very crude thumbnail first. And all that really is working off something that's much smaller, getting in all the broad strokes, then slowly zooming in or redrawing it on a larger piece and tightening up the work. So lots of different ways you could think about this, but hopefully this has helped you to figure out how you could do these group shots and draw multiple characters on the scene. Let me know what you think of this video, what else you'd like to see in the future, and make sure to comment below. As always, thank you very much for tuning in, watching this channel. More content is on the way very soon. Keep drawing, keep having fun, and bye for now.